Staff Sergeant Maria Santos never imagined that her expertise with inventory spreadsheets and supply chain logistics would one day save the lives of an entire Ranger platoon. At 28, she had spent 6 years in the Army, most of it behind desks and in warehouses, ensuring soldiers had everything from ammunition to medical supplies. Her colleagues often joked that she could find a needle in a haystack or procure ice in the desert, but combat operations seemed as foreign to her as quantum physics. The forward operating base in eastern Afghanistan buzzed with the usual morning activity. Maria sat in her cramped office, surrounded by towers of paperwork and multiple computer screens displaying real-time inventory data. Her fingers danced across the keyboard as she tracked a delayed shipment of winter gear that should have arrived 3 days earlier. The Rangers needed that equipment for their upcoming mission in the mountain valleys, where temperatures dropped below freezing at night. Lieutenant Colonel James Harrison, the base commander, appeared in her doorway without warning. His face carried the weight of command and the exhaustion that came with making life and death decisions daily. Maria had worked with him for 8 months, and she had never seen him look quite so grim. "Santos, I need you to prep for an unusual assignment," he said, stepping into her office and closing the door behind him. The gesture immediately put her on edge. Closed-door conversations with the colonel usually meant something significant was happening. She saved her work and turned to face him fully. "What kind of assignment, sir?" Harrison pulled up a chair and sat down, which surprised her even more. Colonels didn't typically sit in supply sergeants' offices for casual conversations. "The Rangers are heading out on a reconnaissance mission tomorrow. Intel suggests there's increased Taliban activity in the Korangal Valley. They need someone who knows our supply capabilities inside and out to accompany them as an advisor." Maria felt her stomach drop. "Sir, I'm not combat trained beyond basic requirements. I haven't fired my weapon outside of qualification ranges in over 2 years. I understand your concerns, but this isn't about direct combat," Harrison explained, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced himself. "The mission parameters have changed. We're establishing a temporary observation post that might need to be sustained for up to 2 weeks. The Rangers need someone who can assess what supplies they'll need for extended operations and coordinate resupply drops if necessary." She stared at him, processing the implications. Why can't they just take extra supplies? Weight restrictions. They're going in light and fast, but if they need to stay longer than expected, we need someone there who can make real-time decisions about what gets prioritized in resupply operations. Harrison leaned forward slightly. "Santos, you know our supply network better than anyone on this base. You've consistently found solutions when everyone else said something was impossible." Maria thought about the countless times she had worked miracles with delayed shipments, damaged equipment, and impossible requests. Just last month, she had managed to get replacement parts for a critical communications array flown in from 3 different bases when the manufacturer said the components wouldn't be available for weeks. But this felt entirely different from her usual problem-solving challenges. "What's the timeline, sir?" "They move out at 0400 tomorrow. You'd fly out with the support element to the landing zone. Then, move with the Rangers to their observation position. Initial mission duration is 72 hours, but it could extend based on what they observe." She found herself nodding before she had fully made the decision. Something in Harrison's demeanor told her this wasn't really a request, despite how he had phrased it. "What do I need to know about the Rangers I'll be working with?" Harrison's expression lightened slightly. "Good. The platoon is led by First Lieutenant David Chun. Solid officer, 2 deployments under his belt. His platoon sergeant is Staff Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez. They've worked together for 18 months. The Rangers know you're coming, and they understand your role is advisory, not combat." Over the next several hours, Maria found herself in a whirlwind of preparation she had never experienced before. The Rangers' equipment sergeant, a weathered soldier named Thompson, walked her through their standard loadout and explained the weight calculations that governed everything they could carry. Every ounce mattered when soldiers had to move quickly across rough terrain while carrying weapons, ammunition, food, water, and equipment for their mission. The observation post location is about 8 kilometers from the nearest helicopter landing zone, Thompson explained as they reviewed topographical maps. "That means everything we need has to either be carried in initially or brought in by foot patrol if we request resupply. Maria studied the terrain features on the map, noting the steep ridgelines and narrow valleys that would make movement challenging. What about weather factors? Temperature swings are extreme. Hot during the day, near freezing at night. Rain is possible, which would make the trails treacherous, Thompson replied. The Rangers are used to it, but extended operations in those conditions require careful planning for food, water, and medical supplies. That evening, Maria stood in her quarters, staring at the combat gear laid out on her bunk. The body armor felt heavier than she remembered from her last qualification exercise. Her helmet, with its night vision mount and communication equipment, represented technology she understood in theory but had rarely used in practice. The weight of the responsibility settling on her shoulders felt heavier than all the equipment combined. She picked up her rifle and performed the functions checks she had learned years earlier in basic training. The movements felt awkward after so long away from regular weapons handling, but muscle memory gradually returned. She practiced loading and unloading magazines until the motions became smoother, though still nowhere near the fluid efficiency she had observed in combat soldiers. Her phone rang, interrupting her preparation routine. The caller ID showed her sister's number from back home in Texas. "Hey, Maria, how's the army treating you?" Lisa's cheerful voice brought a momentary smile to Maria's face. "It's treating me fine. Just preparing for a different kind of work assignment," Maria replied, not wanting to worry her family with details about the mission. "Different how? Are you finally getting out of that office?" Maria chuckled despite her nervousness. "Something like that. I might be doing some field work for the next few days." They chatted for a few more minutes about family news and hometown gossip before Maria explained she needed to finish preparing for an early morning. After hanging up, she sat quietly for several minutes, thinking about how different her world was from the normal life her sister lived as a teacher in suburban Dallas. The next morning arrived faster than Maria would have preferred. She reported to the designated staging area at 0330, finding the Rangers already conducting final equipment checks under portable floodlights. The soldiers moved with practiced efficiency, their movements economical and purposeful in the pre-dawn darkness. Lieutenant Chin approached her as she struggled slightly with adjusting her gear. He was younger than she had expected, probably in his mid-20s, but carried himself with the confidence that came from leading soldiers in dangerous situations. "Sergeant Santos, welcome to the team," he said, extending his hand. "Thompson briefed me on your role. We're glad to have someone with your expertise along." "Thank you, sir. I'll do my best to stay out of your way and provide whatever support you need." Chin smiled. "Don't worry about staying out of the way. You're part of the team now. Rodriguez will give you a quick brief on movement procedures and communication protocols." Staff Sergeant Rodriguez materialized beside them as if summoned by the mention of his name. He was stockier than Chin, with graying hair at his temples that suggested more experience than his youthful face indicated. "Santos, right? Thompson says you're the miracle worker who can find anything we need," Rodriguez said with a slight grin. "Hope that includes finding us a way home if things go sideways." Despite her nervousness, Maria found herself smiling back. "I'll do my best, Sergeant." The helicopter ride to the insertion point passed in relative silence. Maria sat among the Rangers, noting how they seemed to use the flight time for final mental preparation. Some checked and rechecked their equipment, while others appeared to be sleeping despite the engine noise and vibration. She tried to follow their example, using the time to review the supply lists and contingency plans she had prepared. As the helicopter began its approach to the landing zone, Rodriguez leaned over to her. "Once we're on the ground, stay close to me until you get the rhythm of how we move. The terrain out here can be tricky, especially if you're not used to it." The helicopter touched down in a small clearing surrounded by rocky outcroppings and sparse vegetation. The Rangers moved off the aircraft quickly and efficiently, establishing a security perimeter while Maria gathered her gear and followed Rodriguez to a position behind a large boulder. The silence after the helicopter departed was profound. Maria had grown accustomed to the constant background noise of the forward operating base, with its generators, vehicles, and general activity. Here, the only sounds were wind moving through the rocks and the occasional call of a bird in the distance. Lieutenant Chun used hand signals to organize the platoon for movement toward their objective. Maria watched the Rangers communicate through a series of gestures she didn't understand, but found fascinating in their efficiency. Rodriguez touched her shoulder and pointed in the direction they would be moving, then held up his hand with fingers spread to indicate they would move in 5 minutes. The march to the observation post took nearly 3 hours across terrain that challenged Maria's physical fitness more than she had anticipated. The Rangers moved in a tactical formation that prioritized security while maintaining reasonable speed. Rodriguez stayed near her, occasionally offering quiet guidance about foot placement or obstacle navigation. By the time they reached their destination, Maria's respect for the Rangers' physical conditioning had increased dramatically. They appeared barely winded by the movement that had left her breathing heavily, though she was pleased to discover she had kept up without slowing the team's progress. The observation post location was a rocky outcropping that provided excellent views of the valley below, while offering natural concealment from observation by potential enemies. The Rangers immediately began establishing defensive positions and setting up their equipment while Maria surveyed the area from a logistical perspective. She pulled out a small notebook and began documenting observations that might affect supply requirements. The position was more exposed to wind than she had expected from studying maps, which would affect water consumption and heating requirements. The rocky ground would make digging difficult if they needed to establish more permanent positions. "What do you think, Santos?" Lieutenant Chen asked, settling beside her with a pair of binoculars. "It's a good position tactically, but if you need to stay here for extended periods, water will be your biggest challenge," she replied, pointing toward the valley below. The nearest confirmed water source is about 2 kilometers down that ridge, which means either regular patrols to refill or increased water delivery with any resupply. Chen nodded approvingly. "Good catch. What else?" Maria continued her assessment, noting factors that would affect everything from ammunition storage to medical evacuation procedures. As the day progressed, she found herself becoming more comfortable with her role and more confident in her ability to contribute meaningfully to the mission. That evening, as the Rangers established watch schedules and prepared for their first night in the field, Maria reviewed her notes by the light of a red-filtered flashlight. She had filled several pages with observations and recommendations that she felt would be valuable for future operations in similar terrain. Rodriguez approached her position as she was finishing her documentation. "How was your first day playing infantry, Santos?" "Harder than I expected, but interesting," she replied honestly. "You guys make this look a lot easier than it actually is." "Everything gets easier with practice," Rodriguez said, settling down beside her. "You did good today. Kept up with the movement, asked smart questions, and didn't slow us down. That's more than we can say about some of the officers they've sent us." The compliment meant more to Maria than Rodriguez probably realized. She had spent most of the day worried about being a burden to the team, and knowing that the experienced sergeant felt she was contributing positively helped ease some of her anxiety about the mission. As darkness settled over their position, Maria experienced a profound. The second day at the observation post began before dawn, with the subtle sounds of Rangers quietly preparing for another day of surveillance. Maria woke to find frost covering her sleeping bag, a reminder of how drastically temperatures dropped in the mountains during the night. Her breath formed small clouds in the cold air as she performed her morning equipment checks, following the routine Rodriguez had established for her. Lieutenant Chun gathered the platoon for a brief morning briefing, speaking in hushed tones that carried just far enough for everyone to hear. Intelligence reports indicated increased radio chatter in the valley, suggesting possible enemy movement. The Rangers would maintain heightened vigilance while continuing their primary mission of observation and intelligence gathering. Maria spent the morning reviewing consumption rates from their first 24 hours in position. Water usage had been slightly higher than projected due to the dry air and physical exertion of establishing their position. Food consumption remained on schedule, but she noted that the Rangers were burning calories quickly in the cold, thin air. If the mission extended beyond its planned duration, nutritional requirements would need careful monitoring. Around mid-morning, Specialist Williams approached her position carrying his radio equipment. Williams was the platoon's primary communications specialist, responsible for maintaining contact with the forward operating base and coordinating with higher headquarters. Sergeant Santos, Lieutenant Chin wants you to review the resupply request before I transmit it, Williams said, handing her a handwritten message form. We're asking for additional batteries and some extra medical supplies. Maria studied the request carefully, noting the specific items and quantities. Her experience with supply procedures immediately identified several potential problems. Williams, the medical supplies they're requesting aren't standard inventory at our base. They'll have to be transferred from the main supply depot, which could add 12 to 18 hours to delivery time. Williams frowned. What would you recommend as alternatives? There are equivalent items we definitely have in stock, Maria replied, pulling out her field notebook where she had written down the base's current inventory levels before deploying. If Chun approves the substitutions, we can probably get everything delivered tomorrow instead of waiting an extra day. She wrote out the recommended changes and walked with Williams to find Lieutenant Chun, who was studying the valley through high-powered binoculars. The young officer listened to her explanation and quickly approved the modifications to their resupply request. Good thinking, Santos, Chun said. The faster we get those supplies, the more flexibility we have if the mission parameters change. As Williams transmitted the updated request, Maria felt a growing confidence in her ability to contribute meaningfully to the operation. Her detailed knowledge of supply systems and inventory management was proving valuable in ways she had never anticipated during her years of warehouse duty. The afternoon brought the first sign of trouble. Sergeant Rodriguez called softly for Lieutenant Chun to join him at the primary observation position. Through their field glasses, the Rangers had spotted movement in the valley that didn't match normal civilian patterns. Maria watched from her position as Chun and Rodriguez observed the suspicious activity, occasionally pointing toward specific locations and consulting their maps. After several minutes of observation, Chun made a radio call to higher headquarters, reporting their findings and requesting guidance. The response came back quickly. Intelligence analysts believed the movement might represent advanced scouts for a larger enemy force. The Rangers were directed to continue observation and be prepared for possible extraction if the situation escalated. Santos, we might need to modify our supply situation, Chun informed her after completing his radio communication. If we extract early, we'll leave with whatever we carried in. If we stay longer due to increased enemy activity, we might need expedited resupply. Maria nodded, her mind already working through the implications. If we need fast resupply under potentially hostile conditions, that limits us to airdrops rather than helicopter deliveries. Weight and packaging become critical factors. What's your recommendation? Let me work up 2 different scenarios, she replied, pulling out her notebook again. One for emergency extraction where we leave non-essential equipment behind, and another for extended operations with airdrop resupply. Over the next hour, Maria developed detailed plans for both contingencies. For emergency extraction, she identified equipment that could be abandoned without compromising mission security, reducing the weight each ranger would need to carry during a potentially rapid withdrawal. For extended operations, she calculated supply requirements and identified items that could be effectively delivered by airdrop without requiring helicopter landing zones. As evening approached, the situation in the valley became more concerning. The Rangers observed what appeared to be organized reconnaissance activity by enemy forces. Small groups of individuals were systematically checking various locations, suggesting they might be looking for something specific or preparing for larger operations. Chun gathered his squad leaders for a planning session that included Maria for the first time. The informal inclusion in tactical discussions represented a significant shift in how the Rangers viewed her role within the team. The enemy activity suggests they're either looking for our position or preparing the area for future operations, Chun explained to the group. Either way, we need to be ready for rapid extraction or potential contact. Rodriguez added his assessment. If they're actively hunting us, staying here becomes increasingly risky. If they're preparing for future operations, our intelligence value increases, but so does the danger. Maria listened carefully as the experienced soldiers discussed tactical options and risk assessments. When Chin asked for her input regarding supply implications, she felt prepared to contribute meaningfully to the conversation. From a logistics perspective, we have enough supplies for 3 more days at current consumption rates, she reported. If we need to move quickly, each man can carry emergency rations for 2 days plus essential equipment. If we stay in position, we'll need resupply within 48 hours to maintain full operational capability. What about ammunition? Asked Staff Sergeant Martinez, one of the squad leaders. Current levels support defensive operations or limited engagement, Maria replied, consulting her notes. Extended firefight capability would require immediate resupply or extraction. The tactical discussion continued for another 30 minutes before Chun made his decision. They would maintain position overnight, but prepare for possible extraction at first light. Maria would coordinate with the base to ensure extraction helicopters could be airborne quickly if needed. That night, the Rangers implemented enhanced security measures. Guard shifts were shortened to maintain higher alertness levels, and everyone slept fully clothed with equipment immediately accessible. Maria found herself assigned to a defensive position for the first time, armed with specific instructions about what to do if their position came under attack. Rodriguez spent time with her reviewing basic defensive procedures, showing her how to properly use available cover and ensuring she understood the platoon's communication signals for various situations. Remember, if things go bad, your job is to support the Rangers, not try to be a hero, Rodriguez explained quietly. Stay low, follow orders immediately, and use your rifle only if directly threatened. We'll handle the fighting. The weight of her rifle felt different now, transformed from a piece of required equipment into a potential lifeline. Maria performed function checks on the weapon and arranged her ammunition magazines for easy access, following procedures she had learned years earlier but never expected to use. Around midnight, Williams received an urgent radio transmission from the forward operating base. Intelligence sources reported significant enemy movement throughout the region, with multiple Taliban units apparently converging on their general area. Higher headquarters was considering immediate extraction for all reconnaissance teams in the field. Chun gathered his squad leaders again, this time including Maria, without hesitation. The situation had escalated beyond routine surveillance into potential combat operations. New intelligence suggests coordinated enemy activity throughout our operational area, Chun briefed the group. Multiple units are moving, possibly in response to our presence or as preparation for planned attacks on coalition forces. What's the extraction timeline? Martinez asked. Helicopters can be airborne in 2 hours, but landing zone security becomes questionable if enemy forces are actively operating in the area, Chun replied. We might need to move to an alternate extraction point. Maria's logistical training immediately focused on the movement requirements. Moving to alternate extraction points means carrying everything we absolutely need while leaving behind anything non-essential. I can have abandonment procedures ready in 30 minutes. Do it, Chun ordered. Also prepare a list of intelligence materials and equipment that must be evacuated regardless of circumstances. As Maria worked on her new lists, she could hear the Rangers quietly preparing equipment and reviewing movement procedures. The professional calm they maintained despite the obviously dangerous situation impressed her greatly. These soldiers had trained extensively for exactly this type of scenario, and their confidence provided reassurance even as her own anxiety increased. Williams continued monitoring radio communications, providing periodic updates on enemy movement and friendly force locations. Other reconnaissance teams in the region were reporting similar increased activity, confirming that the situation represented a significant escalation in enemy operations. By 0200 hours, Maria had completed her equipment prioritization lists and coordinated with the base regarding extraction procedures. Essential intelligence materials fit into 2 backpacks that could be carried by designated Rangers. Personal equipment had been reduced to absolute necessities, with everything else prepared for destruction if they couldn't carry it out. Santos, good work on the lists, Chun said after reviewing her preparations. If we extract, you'll move with Rodriguez's squad. Stay close to him and follow his instructions exactly. The next few hours passed slowly, with Rangers maintaining vigilant watch while monitoring radio communications for updates on the developing situation. Enemy activity continued throughout the valley, and Reports from other teams suggested a coordinated operation that extended far beyond their immediate area. As dawn approached, the situation reached a critical decision point. Intelligence analysts believed enemy forces were actively searching for coalition reconnaissance teams, making continued operations extremely hazardous. However, the intelligence value of observing whatever the enemy units were preparing justified significant risk. Chen received authorization to make the final decision based on his assessment of immediate threats to his platoon. The young officer carried the weight of choosing between mission accomplishment and force protection, a burden that Maria now understood with new clarity. "We're staying," Chen announced after consulting with his squad leaders. "The intel we're gathering here is too valuable to abandon unless directly threatened. But we implement full defensive preparations and maintain extraction readiness." Rodriguez assigned Maria to help prepare defensive positions, a task that utilized her organizational skills in ways she had never imagined. She coordinated the placement of ammunition, medical supplies, and essential equipment to support defensive operations while ensuring critical items remained easily accessible for rapid extraction. As the sun rose on their third day at the observation post, Maria realized that her role had evolved far beyond the supply advisory position originally envisioned. She had become an integrated member of a ranger platoon preparing for potential combat operations in hostile territory. The view of the valley that had seemed beautiful and peaceful just 2 days earlier now appeared threatening and dangerous. Somewhere among those rocks and sparse vegetation, enemy forces were moving with unknown intentions. The Rangers watching from their concealed position represented the only early warning system for coalition forces potentially hours away. Maria checked her equipment one final time and settled into her assigned defensive position. Her notebook, filled with supply calculations and logistical observations, now shared space with loaded ammunition magazines and a rifle she might actually need to use. The transformation from supply sergeant to combat soldier had happened. The attack came without warning during the early morning hours of their fourth day. Maria was monitoring radio communications when the first rifle shots echoed across the valley, followed immediately by the distinctive crack of bullets passing overhead. Her years of peacetime training had not prepared her for the visceral shock of being under hostile fire. "Contact left. 200 meters. Rodriguez's voice cut through the chaos as Rangers immediately moved to defensive positions they had prepared during the night. The months of drilling and preparation that had seemed almost routine to Maria now revealed their life-saving importance as each soldier moved with practiced efficiency despite the sudden violence. Maria found herself pressed against the rocky barrier that formed their primary defensive line, her rifle pointed toward threats she couldn't clearly identify. The enemy fighters were well concealed among the rocks and vegetation below, visible only as brief muzzle flashes and occasional movement between cover positions. Lieutenant Chen's voice carried clearly over the gunfire as he coordinated defensive fires and called for supporting artillery. "Williams, get me indirect fire on grid 274856. Martinez, keep pressure on the left flank. Rodriguez, they're trying to envelope our right side." The radio crackled with urgent traffic as Williams worked to coordinate fire support, while simultaneously calling higher headquarters to report their situation. Maria could hear the stress in his voice as he juggled multiple critical communications while bullets snapped overhead and ricocheted off nearby rocks. "Base, this is Ranger 6-1. We are taking effective enemy fire from approximately squad-sized element. Request immediate close air support and medical evacuation standby," Williams transmitted while ducking lower as automatic weapons fire intensified. Through the noise and confusion, Maria began to understand the tactical situation developing around their position. The enemy had approached during darkness and established firing positions that allowed them to attack the Rangers from multiple directions simultaneously. What had started as a reconnaissance mission was rapidly becoming a desperate fight for survival. Rodriguez appeared beside her, his face calm despite the dangerous situation. "Santos, we need you to manage ammunition distribution. Track what each position is using and let me know when anyone gets low." The request gave Maria something specific to focus on besides her own fear. She began moving between Ranger positions, checking ammunition levels, and redistributing supplies as needed. The organizational skills that had made her effective with warehouse inventories now applied to life and death resource management in combat. At Specialist Johnson's position, she found the young ranger firing carefully aimed shots at enemy positions while conserving ammunition with impressive discipline. "How are you on ammo, Johnson?" "Down to 4 magazines, Sergeant," he replied without taking his eyes off his sector of responsibility. "Haven't seen clear targets for the last 10 minutes, but they're definitely still out there." Maria made notes on ammunition consumption and moved to the next position, where Staff Sergeant Martinez was directing fires from his squad. The squad leader's calm professionalism under fire impressed her greatly, as he continued making tactical decisions and encouraging his soldiers despite bullets impacting near his position. "Martinez, ammunition status?" she asked during a brief lull in enemy fire. "We're good for now, but if this goes much longer, we'll need resupply," he replied, pointing towards several rangers. "Jackson and Peters are both down to 3 magazines each. Chen wants everyone to maintain at least 2 full magazines in reserve if possible." The tactical picture became clearer as Maria moved throughout the defensive position. The Rangers were holding their ground effectively, but ammunition consumption was higher than their planning had anticipated. If the firefight continued much longer, they would face serious supply challenges that could compromise their defensive capability. She worked her way back to Lieutenant Chen's position, where the young officer was coordinating with multiple radio nets while simultaneously directing his platoon's defensive fires. The stress of command under combat conditions was evident in his focused intensity, but his decision-making remained clear and decisive. "Sir, ammunition update," Maria reported, consulting her hasty notes. "Current consumption rate means we'll hit critical levels within 2 hours if the engagement continues at this intensity." Chen nodded grimly. "What about redistribution from less engaged positions?" "I can shift about 6 magazines from the rear positions to the flanks where contact is heaviest, but that's a temporary solution," she replied, already calculating possibilities. "For sustained operations, we need resupply or extraction." "Extraction isn't possible with this level of enemy fire," Chen said, ducking slightly as a burst of automatic weapons fire passed nearby. "Williams is working on close air support, but weather is marginal for helicopter operations." As if summoned by their conversation, Williams called out from his radio position. "Lieutenant, air support is 15 minutes out, but visibility is dropping fast. They might not be able to engage effectively." The weather had been deteriorating since dawn, with low clouds and intermittent rain reducing visibility throughout the valley. What had initially seemed like a minor inconvenience now represented a potential tactical disaster if it prevented air support from reaching their position. Maria found herself thinking like a logistician even in the middle of a firefight. Weather delays for air support meant extended ammunition consumption. Helicopter extraction became impossible in poor visibility, requiring ground movement to alternate pickup zones. Every variable affected supply requirements and tactical options in ways her training had taught her to analyze automatically. "Lieutenant, if air support can't make it through the weather, what about artillery support?" she asked, surprising herself with the tactical question. Chen looked at her with new respect. "Good thinking. Williams, check on indirect fire availability and time to target." The next 30 minutes tested everyone's endurance as the firefight continued with varying intensity. Enemy fighters maintained pressure on the Ranger position while avoiding decisive engagement that would make them vulnerable to superior coalition firepower. The result was a grinding attrition battle that favored whoever had better supply lines and support. Maria continued her ammunition management duties, but her role gradually expanded as the Rangers recognized her organizational capabilities. She began coordinating medical supplies when Specialist Adams took a minor wound from rock fragments, and she helped redistribute equipment when Rangers needed to change positions. "Santos, we need you to prep the alternate extraction site," Rodriguez called to her during a brief reduction in enemy fire. "If we have to move, we need someone who knows exactly what we're taking and what we're leaving behind." The alternate extraction site was approximately 800 meters from their current position, requiring movement across exposed terrain while potentially under enemy observation. Maria's preparations would determine whether the Rangers could move quickly with essential equipment or would be slowed by unnecessary gear. She worked frantically to prepare movement lists while continuing to monitor ammunition distribution. Essential intelligence materials went into one category, critical medical supplies into another, and minimum equipment for each Ranger into a third. Everything else would be destroyed rather than abandoned to enemy forces. Sergeant Santos, Lieutenant Chin called to her as enemy fire intensified again. "What's our status for movement?" "Ready to move with essential items in 15 minutes, sir," she replied, checking her lists one final time. Each Ranger carries mission essential equipment plus 48 hours of food and water, intelligence materials, and critical medical supplies distributed among squad leaders. "Outstanding," Chen said. Then, turned to coordinate with Williams about extraction helicopter availability. The radio crackled with updated information about air support and extraction options. Weather conditions had deteriorated further, making helicopter operations extremely hazardous. However, artillery support was now available and standing by for fire missions to suppress enemy positions. "All positions, this is Ranger 6-1, Chen announced over their internal radio net. "Indirect fire incoming in 2 minutes. Keep your heads down and be ready to move when the fires lift." Maria pressed herself against the rocky cover as the first artillery rounds impacted in the valley below. The concussive effects of high explosive shells detonating near enemy positions created momentary silence as hostile fire ceased. The Rangers used the opportunity to improve their positions and redistribute ammunition one final time. When the artillery barrage ended, enemy fire resumed, but with noticeably less intensity and coordination. Several enemy positions had been eliminated or forced to relocate, giving the Rangers temporary tactical advantage they needed to execute their extraction plan. "All squads, prepare to move," Rodriguez called out as Williams confirmed that extraction helicopters were attempting to reach them despite weather conditions. "Santos, stay with first squad during movement. You know what we're carrying and what we need to destroy." The movement to the alternate extraction site required 30 minutes of careful navigation across terrain that offered limited concealment from enemy observation. Maria found herself moving with combat-experienced soldiers who made tactical movement look deceptively easy while she struggled to maintain proper spacing and awareness. Halfway to the extraction site, enemy forces renewed their attack with increased intensity, apparently recognizing that the Rangers were attempting to withdraw. Automatic weapons fire and rocket-propelled grenades forced the platoon to take cover and return fire while continuing to bound toward their objective. Maria discovered that her months of physical training had not adequately prepared her for the demands of combat movement while carrying equipment and ammunition. The Rangers maintained tactical formation and mutual support despite the challenging conditions, but she found herself struggling to keep pace while maintaining situational awareness. "Santos, you're doing fine," Rodriguez encouraged her during a brief halt. "Just focus on staying with Johnson and let him guide your movement. Don't worry about anything except following him and keeping up." The encouragement helped Maria maintain her confidence as they resumed movement toward the extraction site. Her supply coordinator background provided no preparation for combat operations, but the Rangers' acceptance of her as a team member gave her strength to continue despite her fear and physical exhaustion. Arrival at the alternate extraction site brought mixed news. The landing zone was secure and suitable for helicopter operations, but weather conditions remained marginal for aviation. The extraction helicopters were airborne but might not be able to land safely depending on visibility when they reached the area. Chen established defensive positions around the landing zone, while Williams maintained constant communication with the approaching aircraft. Maria used the temporary halt to conduct final equipment checks and ensure that essential supplies were properly distributed among the Rangers. "Helicopter inbound, 2 minutes," Williams announced as the distinctive sound of rotor blades became audible through the low clouds. The next few minutes passed with agonizing tension as everyone listened for signs that the helicopters could complete the extraction safely. Enemy fire had ceased temporarily, but hostile forces were certainly moving to re-establish contact and potentially interdict the extraction operation. Maria felt a profound sense of relief when the first helicopter appeared through the clouds and began its approach to their landing zone. The sight of the aircraft represented safety and return to the familiar world of the forward operating base, but also marked the end of an experience that had fundamentally changed her understanding of her role as a soldier. As Rangers loaded equipment and prepared to board the helicopters, Maria realized that her 4 days with the platoon had taught her more about military service than her previous 6 years combined. She had discovered capabilities she never knew she possessed and earned acceptance from soldiers she had always respected but never fully understood. Lieutenant Chen approached her as they waited for the final helicopter to arrive. "Santos, I'm putting you in for a commendation. Your performance out here was exceptional for someone without combat experience." "Thank you, sir, but I was just doing my job," she replied, though she felt immense pride in his recognition. "No, you did a lot more than your job," Chen said firmly. "You became a ranger when we needed you to be one. That's something special." The flight back to the forward operating base passed quickly, with Maria seated among rangers who had accepted her completely as a member of their team. The conversation during the flight centered on lessons learned and preparations for their next mission, naturally including her input on supply and logistics considerations. Upon landing at the base, Maria experienced an unexpected sense of displacement. The familiar surroundings of her previous assignment seemed somehow less important than they had before. Her office, with its computers and paperwork, represented safety and routine, but also limitations she had never recognized before her time with the Rangers. Colonel Harrison was waiting for her when she reported back to headquarters. His expression showed a mixture of relief and curiosity about her experiences during the extended mission that had become a combat operation. "Welcome back, Santos," Harrison said, gesturing for her to sit down in his office. "I want a complete debrief on your time with the Rangers, but first, how do you feel about the experience?" Maria considered the question carefully before answering. For days earlier, she would have described herself as a supply sergeant who happened to wear a uniform. Now, she felt like a soldier who specialized in logistics rather than combat, but was capable of both when circumstances required. "It was challenging, sir, but it showed me aspects of military service I never understood before," she replied honestly. "The Rangers taught me that every soldier needs to be ready for combat, regardless of their primary specialty." Harrison nodded approvingly. "Lieutenant Chen spoke very highly of your performance. He said you adapted quickly to combat conditions and contributed significantly to mission success." Over the next hour, Maria provided a detailed briefing on the mission from her unique perspective as both participant and logistical analyst. Her observations about supply requirements for extended operations in remote locations provided valuable information for planning future missions. "Based on your experience, what changes would you recommend for similar operations?" Harrison asked. "Cross-training, sir," Maria replied immediately. "Supply personnel should understand basic combat operations, and combat soldiers should better understand logistics limitations. The integration made both functions more effective." Harrison made notes as she spoke, clearly considering the broader implications of her recommendations. The conversation continued for another 30 minutes before he dismissed her to complete her post-mission administrative requirements. Walking back to her quarters, Maria reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in less than a week. The supply coordinator who had reluctantly accepted an advisory role with the Rangers had discovered a version of herself she never knew existed. She had proven capable of functioning effectively in combat conditions while maintaining her expertise in logistics and supply operations. Her phone showed several missed calls from her sister, who had been worried about not hearing from her for several days. Maria smiled as she prepared to call back, wondering how to explain that her temporary field assignment had become a life-changing experience that redefined her understanding of military service. The next morning, Maria reported to her office to find Lieutenant Chen waiting for her with a formal request for her permanent assignment to his unit as a logistics specialist. The document represented an opportunity to continue the challenging work she had discovered with the Rangers while building on her newly proven capabilities. As she reviewed Chen's request, Maria realized that her transformation from supply coordinator to combat-capable soldier was complete. The woman who had once feared leaving her office for field operations was now ready to accept the challenges and responsibilities of serving with elite combat units in the most demanding environments. Her decision was immediate and certain. Maria Santos was ready to continue her evolution from logistics specialist to integrated team member capable of supporting combat operations in any environment. The Rangers had given her the opportunity to discover her true potential as a soldier, and she was determined to build on that foundation for the remainder of her military career. Gradually, but the reality of her new situation struck her with sudden clarity. She was no longer preparing for hypothetical challenges or managing abstract supply requirements. She was preparing to fight alongside Rangers in defense of their position and their mission. As enemy activity in the valley continued to increase, Maria understood that the next few hours would likely test every skill she had ever developed and challenge her in ways that no amount of training could have prepared her for. The supply coordinator who had boarded a helicopter 3 days earlier seemed like a completely different person from the soldier now preparing for possible combat operations. The stakes had escalated beyond anything she had ever experienced, and there was no going back to the safety and predictability of her former assignment. She was now fully committed to sharing whatever fate awaited the Rangers in their exposed position overlooking an increasingly dangerous valley. Sense of isolation unlike anything in her previous military experience. The forward operating base had always felt safe and connected to the larger world through communications, regular supply flights, and the presence of hundreds of other soldiers. Here, 15 Rangers and one supply sergeant occupied a small rocky outcropping in hostile territory, dependent entirely on their own skills and preparation for survival. The realization was both humbling and strangely exhilarating. For the first time in her military career, Maria felt like she was truly serving in a combat role, even if her primary responsibilities remained logistical. She was sharing the same risks as the Rangers, breathing the same thin mountain air, and contributing to a mission that could have real strategic importance. Before settling in for her assigned sleep period, Maria performed one final check of her equipment and reviewed the communication procedures Rodriguez had taught her earlier. If something went wrong during the night, she wanted to be ready to contribute rather than being a liability that others had to protect. As she lay in her sleeping bag, staring up at stars brighter than any she had ever seen from the base, Maria reflected on how much her world had changed in just 24 hours. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and perhaps provide her first real test of how effectively she could apply her logistical expertise in a combat environment. The sound of wind moving through the rocks provided a constant background whisper that reminded her of how exposed and vulnerable their position truly was. Somewhere in the valley below, enemy forces might be moving in the darkness, unaware of the Rangers watching from above, but potentially dangerous if they discovered the observation post. Maria closed her eyes and tried to rest, knowing that the next few days would likely test every skill she had developed during her 6 years in the Army. For the first time since joining the military, she felt like she was truly earning the title of soldier rather than simply performing a job that happened to be in a military setting.